Recently, President Donald Trump addressed Congress with his familiar refrain, "We're taking it back," renewing his long-standing claim that the Panama Canal, a strategic asset under Panamanian control since the Torrijos-Carter treaties, should be reclaimed by the United States. He insisted that foreign influences, particularly from China, have compromised the canal's security and declared that this vital maritime passage was ripped off from American hands. His remarks have reignited debates about American imperial ambition versus national sovereignty and highlighted how a centuries-old struggle now intersects with modern global power shifts. To understand how we reached this point, we need to look at the canal's early history. The dream of a shortcut linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans began during the mid-19th century California gold rush. At the time, travelers faced a grueling land journey that could stretch to 7 months. One alternative was to sail from New York to the Isthmus of Panama, traverse a 75-kilometer jungle trail once carved by the Spanish, then catch another boat to California. This journey could be completed in as little as 7 weeks, and to speed things up further, a private American company built a railway across Panama. However, shipping large volumes of goods by sea around Cape Horn was extremely dangerous. That route lay between latitudes 40 and 50 degrees, infamous for their roaring 40s and raging 50s, where winds could reach 100 kilometers per hour and waves could tower like 10-story buildings. Sailors claimed that past 40 degrees there was no law, and beyond 50 degrees even God does not exist. A canal at Central America's narrowest point seemed like the logical solution. Yet Panama's mountainous terrain was daunting. Early on, a French team led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, famous for building the Suez Canal, attempted a sea-level canal in 1879. De Lesseps, then 74, underestimated the challenge posed by dense jungles, complex topography, and tropical diseases like malaria and yellow fever, which devastated the workforce. Partway through the project, it was discovered that the Pacific Ocean was more than 20 centimeters lower than the Caribbean, appending engineering plans. Despite desperate measures, including extensive additional financing and even bribery, the project collapsed in 1889, bankrupting the company and leaving French shareholders in ruins. The Panama scandal became a symbol of failed imperial ambition, though the canal's strategic allure for the United States remained. Not long after, the Spanish-American War of 1898 underscored the canal's value when the USS Oregon had to sail around Cape Horn to join the conflict in the Caribbean. Realizing a canal would offer huge commercial and military advantages, the U.S. seized an opportunity. A financially strapped French company was willing to sell its Panama assets for $40 million. But Colombia, then ruling Panama, opposed the sale. The U.S. supported Panamanian independence, effectively using its naval power and a long-standing tradition of encouraging separatist movements. When Panama declared independence on November 3, 1903, Washington recognized the new government 3 days later. Through the Habeas Treaty, the U.S. acquired the entire canal project for $10 million, including machinery, partial construction, engineering plans, and rights to a 10-mile-wide strip of land along the canal. Once in control, the U.S. tapped Chief Engineer John Stevens to abandon the French goal of a sea-level canal. Instead, he planned 3 sets of locks to lift ships 26 meters to an artificial lake, then lower them again on the opposite side. This approach reduced excavation and proved more feasible. The project took 10 years, cost nearly $230 million, and involved 500,000 workers. When the canal finally opened on August 15, 1914, it cut routes by anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 kilometers across North America and about 7,000 kilometers between the Indian and Atlantic Oceans, rivaling the Suez Canal as one of the world's most crucial maritime passages. Yet these achievements came at a terrible cost for the people of Panama. The creation of the Canal Zone, a 10-mile by 5-mile enclave governed solely by the U.S., physically split the country. Inside this state within a state, Americans built modern housing, lawns, swimming pools, and tennis courts, facilities off-limits to local Panamanians. The enclave was guarded by multiple American military bases and checkpoints. Around 60,000 Panamanians were forced to leave their homes by order of President William Taft, and while some were relocated for the construction of Gatun Lake, others were evicted simply because the U.S. authorities did not want dirty Panamanians living near them. From 1920 to 1989, while the U.S. collected roughly $45 billion in canal tolls, Panama received only about $1.1 billion. Many Panamanians view the canal as a national scar that reflects a long history of exploitation and humiliation despite earlier advancements like telegraphs, steamboats, and railways introduced by the French and Americans. Through the 15th and 16th centuries, Spain and Portugal vied for control of the New World, and Panama ended up under Spanish rule as part of New Granada. Even Simón Bolívar, founder of Gran Colombia in the early 1800s, once dreamed of building a canal, but instability and limited technology delayed such ambitions. Over time, various separatist movements in Panama were stifled by Colombia, until the U.S. involvement finally changed the balance of power in 1903. Decades later, in 1977, President Jimmy Carter, facing significant domestic and global pressure, sought to correct what he considered a historical error. Carter, born in 1924 to a modest peanut farming family in Georgia, was known for his honesty and austere lifestyle. Elected at a time when the United States was still coping with the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, Carter quickly set himself apart by eschewing lavish trappings of power. He canceled the use of special chauffeurs, sold the presidential yacht, and even installed solar panels on the White House. This same moral conviction shaped his foreign policy. He championed human rights worldwide, helped negotiate the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel, and also pushed for normalized relations with China. Driven by these principles, Carter pushed through the Torrijos-Carter treaties. He carefully lobbied Congress to approve a phased handover of the Panama Canal by 1999, including a clause guaranteeing the canal's permanent neutrality for ships of all nations. The plan barely passed despite fierce opposition. Some critics argued, "We built it, we paid for it, and it should remain ours." But Carter believed that true power sometimes lies in rectifying past injustices. By the time the final transfer date arrived in 1999, President Bill Clinton was so reluctant to sign that Carter himself, then retired, handled the final documentation. Returning the canal stood as one of Carter's proudest diplomatic achievements. For Panama, the canal came to symbolize not just engineering prowess, but also the ongoing struggle for sovereignty. In 1956, when Egyptian President Nasser reclaimed the Suez Canal, Panamanians felt emboldened. By 1958, university students were planting Panamanian flags in the U.S.-controlled canal zone. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, President Kennedy had tried to reduce tensions in Latin America by agreeing to fly both U.S. and Panamanian flags in the zone. Yet on January 1, 1964, American personnel refused to hoist the Panamanian flag, provoking student protests that left over 20 dead and hundreds injured. Panamanian President Roberto Chiari broke diplomatic relations with Washington until a new treaty was reached, and even the United Kingdom and France condemned the U.S. response, while the Soviet Union and Cuba supported Panama's stance. By the 1970s, the canal had become a financial burden for the United States, with aging equipment, silting, and soaring maintenance costs. Keeping 100,000 American personnel in place around the clock meant that toll revenues fell far short of expenses. As the U.S. economy evolved and its geopolitical interests shifted, giving up the canal began to seem more pragmatic than charitable, even if it scored goodwill in Latin America. A new era arrived in 1997, when Lee Ka-shing, nicknamed the Universal Businessman, took control of key port facilities at both ends of the Canal, Balboa on the Pacific and Cristobal on the Atlantic, through his conglomerate, Hutchison Whampoa. Many doubted the canal's long-term prospects, but Lee believed China's booming trade would boost traffic. He outbid U.S. competitors by a wide margin, a move that proved prescient as China's global economic influence grew. Then, in March 2025, Lee's Chung Kong Group made waves by selling a 90% stake in its Panama port assets, along with 43 global ports, to BlackRock for about $22.765 billion. Hutchison characterized the deal as normal business, but it came after more than 2 decades of operating these ports, an interval that included repeated threats by President Trump to take back the canal, claiming unfair treatment of American vessels and harboring suspicions about Chinese involvement. Under pressure, Panama's government signaled its distance from Beijing by declining to renew its Belt and Road Initiative memorandum. Meanwhile, the country's audit department began scrutinizing lease operations, hinting they might be unconstitutional or tied to tax evasion. Facing these pressures, Lee decided to cash out, adhering to his never-take-the-last-penny philosophy. He was also eager to protect his other major assets in Europe and the UK from political fallout tied to his Chinese attributes. In recent years, China's presence in Panama has indeed grown. Since 2019, China has been Panama's largest trading partner. In 2023, bilateral trade reached about $12.94 billion, with China ranking as Panama's biggest export market and third-largest import source. China is also the canal's second-largest user after the U.S., paying tolls of around $1.4 billion a year, more than 20% of the canal's total toll revenue. Next to the canal sits the Cologne Free Trade Zone, where 40% of goods are of Chinese origin, and more than 70 Chinese enterprises employ over 100 Chinese staff. Chinese companies have invested heavily in building and upgrading port and canal infrastructure, and in June 2016, a Chinese cargo ship was the first vessel to pass through the canal's newly expanded locks. All of this stands in stark contrast to the philosophies of Jimmy Carter and Donald Trump. Carter, who passed away on December 29, 2024, at the age of 100, spent his post-presidency writing books, doing humanitarian work, and living simply in the same modest house he built in 1961. Until his final days, he regarded returning the canal to Panama as one of his proudest achievements. Trump, on the other hand, has been vocal about an America First agenda, willing to use threats and pressure to advance U.S. interests. Critics say this approach reveals a deep-rooted anxiety about America's shifting role in a global economy where emerging players like China can rival or surpass U.S. influence. The Panama Canal remains one of humanity's greatest feats of engineering, an enterprise born from visionary ambition, immense human sacrifice, and intense geopolitical maneuvering. From the ill-fated French attempt under Ferdinand de Lesseps to the ultimately successful American endeavor, the canal transformed global commerce and forever changed Panama's trajectory. Jimmy Carter's move to return control of the canal was both an effort to right historical wrongs and a pragmatic response to economic realities. As global power continues to shift, the canal has again become a flashpoint, evidenced by Li Ka-shing's decision to sell key port assets, China's rising trade dominance, and renewed American pressure. Through it all, the waterway stands as a living testament to the interplay of technology, politics, and human ambition, reminding us that while power may change hands, questions of sovereignty, security, and fair economic benefit endure. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel.